So I've had a few people be a little critical of our efforts to start a nonprofit to help promote and support local sustainable food networks, regenerative farming practices, and humane animal husbandry. I've been told that nonprofits are the evil of all the world, and I've even been called a liberal by some. But folks, you really need to wake up. If that's the way you're viewing it, it's absolutely wrong. First of all, charity and goodwill should be private. It shouldn't be something that we depend on the government to do. We have this feeling that we have about these nonprofits and foundations that are around because they are getting funded from the government. The government chooses who gets the money and who doesn't get the money. But it's really up to us if we have a cause that we want to support to get behind and support. And I also think that if you're one of those people out there who have the impression that small farmers aren't struggling right now, you're absolutely wrong. As we've seen with drought conditions over the past year, the small farmers were the first ones to get their water rights cut off. And that's just the way it goes with everything. When we are looking at the way that governments work, and it's not any fault of their own, they're structured this way. Their job is to look after the largest constituency possible. They're not out there looking after private small businesses, private small farmers. And so when it comes to saving an industry, saving a farmer, they're looking at the ability of that farmer to provide the quantity, not necessarily the quality. And again, it's not a fault of the government. That's what governments are there for. That's what they're supposed to do. But it is the fault of our own for not supporting our local food networks, for not supporting our local farmers. Now with that, you do have some fascism going on, some corporate fascism, because anytime you have politicians, whether they're on the left wing or the right wing, they seem to be influenced heavily by what ends up in their pockets, and that's just the reality of the industry. It is an industry. They're making money at it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of money out there at the moment that would like to put small farmers down, that would like to consolidate our food industry into what they're calling a fourth industrial revolution. If you've noticed, a lot of their focus and attention has been on agriculture, has been on fake foods, lab-grown meats, things like that. And I'm not saying that they're all bad. If you want to eat that stuff, by all means, eat it. But we shouldn't be having industries using government policies, using government funds to try and knock out competition. Because without it, they wouldn't be able to thrive. They wouldn't be able to thrive with their own research. The funds that are needed to get these companies going are coming from taxpayer dollars. Over a year ago, I published a video on GMOs and genetic modifications. And you know, it's one of those things where not every GMO and genetic modification is necessarily all that bad or all that wrong. But it's something that we should all be paying attention to, being aware of. And when it becomes an excess, when it becomes too much, one of my greatest concerns is the environmental impact that we're putting on our ecosystem, because we're introducing a lot of microorganisms that are essentially man-made. And those microorganisms, not every microorganism breaks down in the food that you eat. A lot of it passes back on, and that happens with animals as well. What cows are eating, GMOs, what they're passing back to our earth. Everything we do in that microorganism category is impacting our ecology. It's impacting evolution. And as much as mankind, you can say all you want to, well, it's just a part of evolution. Mankind is an intelligent species. They're driving evolution. But at the end of the day, nature always wins. And so as much as we try and disrupt things, you have to keep in mind that nature is going to win out in the end. And if we try and modify our ecology too much to the point where nature isn't driving it, mankind is driving it, at the end of the day, when nature changes her mind on the direction she wants things to go, we're going to suffer pretty bad. Anyway, in that video, I read to you guys parts of an article that it just kind of shows you the mentality, the mindset of a think tank that is being paid for and funded by some of these large corporations. Here's a replay of that video. But it's interesting to see how agriculture is evolving and our food supply is evolving. One of our subscribers mentioned the other day that they had read an article saying that there'd be a 50% decrease in livestock by the year 2030. And that article did actually exist. I'm going to read a piece of it to you here from just a moment. So the article starts off with saying, we are on the cusp of the fastest, deepest, most consequential disruption of agriculture in history. By 2030, the number of cows in the US will have fallen by 50%, and the cattle and farming industry will be all but bankrupt. All other livestock industries will suffer a similar fate. While the knock-on effects for crop farmers and businesses throughout the value chain will be severe. By 2030, the demand for cow products will have fallen by 70%. Before we reach this point, the US cattle industry will be effectively bankrupt. By 2035, demand for cow products will have shrunk by 80 to 90%. Other livestock markets, such as chicken, pig, and fish, will follow in a similar trajectory. The current industrialized animal agriculture system will be replaced with a food as software model, where foods are engineered by scientists at a molecular level, and uploaded to databases that can be assessed by food designers anywhere in the world. This will result in far more distributed, localized, stable, and resilient food production system. By 2035, about 60% of the land currently used for livestock and feed production will be freed for other uses. This represents 1/4 of the continental US, almost as much land as acquired by the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. The opportunity to reimagine the American landscape by repurposing this land is wholly unprecedented. Modern foods will be cheaper and superior to animal-derived foods. The cost of modern food products will be half that of animal products, and they will be superior in every functional attribute. More nutritious, tastier, and more convenient with such greater variety. Environmental benefits will be profound, with net greenhouse gas emissions by the sector falling by 45%. So this article was published by a California think tank called Rethink X, and basically, Rethink X looks at what we call disruptive technologies and their impact on society. And they think that GMO foods, genetically modified, engineered, created foods, are going to completely replace the animal agriculture, the livestock sector, by 2030. That's not too long ago. We're about to go into 2020, so that's about 10 years from now. In 10 years, they're saying that there's not going to be any livestock left, and the livestock industry will be bankrupt. I think Rethink should rethink a few things. Think about that for a second. The largest disruption in agriculture. This is a deliberate attempt at industry consolidation. This is a deliberate attempt to shut down part of an industry. It's wrongful thinking. Somebody's got to stand up to it. Now, it's interesting when you look at the top 5 meat packaging companies, they all seem to be in a race right now for meat alternatives. I realize that there are a lot of farmers out there, a lot of individuals who have depended on these large meat packaging companies for their income over the years. And it's hard to break away from that mindset when you're dependent on these 5 large meat packaging companies. But they're already in a race to replace you. And when you think about all of these lawsuits over the years of price fixing that have been going on, these investigations of price fixing. Tom Vilsack under Obama actually opened up an investigation into price fixing. And due to a little bit of political meandering, that investigation actually never really took place. Nothing ever really happened with it. And we've kind of seen the same thing happen again. It's interesting how, you know, with every administration we've seen, these promises get thrown out there and then they end up getting pushed off to the side. Whatever we can do to get the voters to pay attention to us, to get the votes, and then we'll just figure out a way to shut it down. It's kind of like when we look at the black farmer bill or the minority farmer bill that got shut down because it was unconstitutional. Of course it was unconstitutional. It actually was, the Supreme Court judge who shut it down was actually protecting over 100 years worth of civil rights rulings by shutting that down. Anybody who came up with that bill knew that that was probably not the right way to go about it. And if you really think about it, there are a lot of different ways they could have accomplished it that were constitutional. Anyway, some of these companies are not as great as we may think that they are. There are a couple brothers who started a very large meat packaging company. I try and stay away from saying names sometimes, but this is JBS. We all know of JBS, especially those of us who saw the viral attack on JBS this year, which was a little suspicious. But these brothers just got out of jail for bribery and all sorts of political meandering that they did. And that's just, I think that's a mentality in the corporate environment that's hard to get by. The problem is that our producers don't have a secondary market to sell to. And they don't have a secondary market to sell to because consumers aren't making that choice. Consumers are choosing to go to the grocery store, price shop, buy what's the most affordable, and it's taking the ability of a farmer away to go to the store and sell directly. The other problem is that we've completely segregated our farmers from society. They're all out in the breadbasket. They're all out in the Midwest, or a majority of them are, where we grow large amounts of livestock, large amounts of crops, and they have no connection with local food networks. They have no way of selling that produce or their meats to local food networks because they have no way of getting it there. We're too divided. And this is one of the biggest problems I see with agriculture today, is that our farmers do not have any other choice, because they have been segregated to the most rural areas, than to sell to these corporations who can get to them to get the food and bring it back to the consumer. When it comes to GMOs, they're not all bad things, but the information campaign that is out there is not as informative as it should be. It's not explaining to people their natural choices and the impacts that GMOs may or may not have on the environment. I don't hear enough people talking about the impacts that introducing microorganisms into an ecology could have. But yet we continue to see advertisements and information put out there explaining why it's better for people. And if you are completely separated from farming, from agriculture, and you're living in a city, you wouldn't know any better. And that's where a lot of this marketing and advertising comes in. So there's definitely an effort to keep this segregation from closing the gaps. And it's not every large meat packaging company out there. You can't put the blame on every single one of them, but you can look at the way that the industry is set up, look at how it's unfolded over time, and see that even if it was inadvertent, this is how we ended up. But I think that times are changing. I think that we are hitting global limits in crop production. We are hitting global limits in our ability to produce. And so even with, I guess lab grown, they can do whatever they want. Cell-based, cell-grown, whatever you want to call it. Whether or not people are going to want to eat that, I don't know. It's not something that I would put on my plate for my kids or myself. But that is obviously an option. You can grow a lot of different things in the lab. But when we're talking about some of these other products, they're relying on the resources of ingredients to be able to create their products and get it out there to the consumers. And I think that that's becoming harder and harder. We've seen that this year in quarterly results from a lot of corporations, the difficulty getting ingredients, the price increases of ingredients. And so a lot of these corporations are going to have a hard time staying afloat without making the shifts that they've been trying to make. And they're also going to have a hard time staying afloat as long as the competition is out there locally. And I think that that's always going to be an issue for the small farmers. If you want to match marketing dollar to marketing dollar, if you want to match lobbying dollar to lobbying dollar, the corporations are always going to have more resources than the small farmers. And that's why we do what we do. That's why we started a nonprofit supporting small, regenerative, sustainable, and humane farming practices. It's not necessarily to stomp on the other guys. I think that when you look at feeding a world, feeding a global population, all of these different types of food producers, agricultural producers, are going to have to play a role. But I also see that these local food networks, these local farmers, these people who are trying to do regenerative practices, these people who are trying to treat their animals differently, are having a harder and harder time getting their products out there at an affordable price where they can make a profit. And if we don't figure out a way to support them, if we don't step up in our own communities to start buying local, maybe not all your food, but start off with like a certain percentage of your grocery bill that you take and put aside to go buy at your local farmers market. Until we start to do that, we're going to continue to see these small farms struggle. We're going to continue to see these small farms fail. There's been a massive consolidation of farms over the years. You can't look at the historical numbers and tell me that there has not been a consolidation of farms throughout the years. And so we need to reverse that trend. If we don't, our own food security is at risk. If these large corporations are going to continue to have issues, struggles to get ingredients at affordable prices that they can make a profit on, or even find the ingredients at all, and we're putting all of our trust and our faith and our ability to eat food in their hands, it's not a very safe position. But when you start to focus back on your local growers, when you start to look at your local farms, then it's at least a little more in your control as far as your ability to support, as far as your ability to see what's happening and know what's coming and communicate with those who your food is coming from. So there's a lot of reasons why we do Meet My Neighbor Productions. Do we believe in local sustainable food networks? Absolutely. I think the global network is failing. I can see it failing within the next 5 years. Personally, that's just a personal view. Do we believe in regenerative practices? Absolutely. I think part of our yield problems have a lot to do with our soil problems. If we keep doing things the way that we have been doing them, we're not going to be able to grow anything without pumping a bunch of chemicals into the ground, which we're already to that point. If you look at the amount of nitrogen it takes, we've had to double that, triple that over the years. The amount of chemicals that we have to put into our food, and that's what these plants are growing off of. That's what we're consuming and putting into our bodies. It's gotten to the point of being dangerous. The good intentions of growing large crops that way don't work anymore. The model doesn't work. But what does work is nature's way. It is amazing what you can do with good soil. And this dates back to the very beginning of this country. George Washington said, if we could keep our farmers from if we could teach our farmers to reuse the soil that they have, we wouldn't have to continue to expand west. And that's the truth of the matter. If we could figure out a way to farm regeneratively, we wouldn't have had all these global expansions. And when you look around the world, when you look at all the countries around the world, and you look at how much we've expanded, there's really no place left to go. And so now we really do have to turn our attention back to soil regeneration. This isn't, I'm not talking about climate change or global warming or anything like that. I'm strictly talking about our ability to grow food. It all depends on the health of that soil. And if we don't do something now, our children aren't going to have a future. And do we believe in humane animal husbandry? Absolutely. I think that animals provide us the ultimate sacrifice. They help take plants and things that we can't eat and turn it into a resourceful energy for us in the form of meat. And because of that, animals should be treated with the utmost respect because they are providing for us. You don't treat something poorly that is providing you with sustenance, providing you with the ability to survive. I feel like in many ways we've done that with animals, we've done that with soil. So that's why we started our nonprofit, because if you're relying on big corporations and the government to fund certain things, what do you think they're going to fund? What do you think they're going to back? Who do you think they're going to be supporting? Charity shouldn't be a form of taxpayer extortion. Charity shouldn't be used in a manner in which you can provoke things. Charity should be private. Charity should be a choice. So if you agree with what I'm saying, then I would hope that you would donate to what we're trying to do so that we could get out there and help support and cover more of these small farmers and help educate the public. If you don't, then I completely understand. Not everybody is going to agree on the same thing I agree with. But it's up to us, you and I, to support our networks, our communities. It should be a private thing. We should be willing to support the life and the culture and the resources that we depend on ourselves. And a nonprofit gives us the ability to do that. It gives us the ability to hold the funds accountable for their use, and many other great things. So when I hear so many people talk about corporations like they're big bad things, and nonprofits like they're big bad things. Everything serves a purpose. If all we ever do is focus on the abuses, everything looks negative. And that's what even with big ag, big ag isn't necessarily all bad. We just tend to focus on the bad parts of it and not the good parts of it, the necessary parts of it. We just happen to choose to focus on the good parts, the necessary parts of small farmers, local farmers, regenerative farmers, people who treat their animals with respect. That's who we want to support. And so that's why we do what we do. I would suggest if you want to eat in the future, you start thinking about it.